All right. Well, let's change gears and again go back to the one thing that has recently changed in terms of the legislation that all buyers that are now in the market or have been in the market re-entering is this new rule, which is the NAR settlement in terms of the buyer commission. And would love, obviously your 2 cents and how that's changed your business, and how you approach that with buyers, knowing that this seismic shift in terms of negotiating what ultimately you get paid.
Of course, I'd be happy to talk about that. So, I mean, it's a seismic, I would say, shift in the way that the business operates. Ultimately, there's really only two things that change, but they're big. One, any buyer that's working with an agent has to have a signed agreement with a buyer's agent. Now, in the past, for the most part, buyer's agents would just work with buyers and not have any agreement signed. It would just be kind of, we would follow a code of ethics that we all agree upon as agents to work with buyers. And you're not technically under contract with a buyer until you have a purchase agreement. Now, I've always thought that was a little funny. I
Yeah.
mean, if you work with a lawyer, they're going to have you sign a document, and to bring it back to real estate, when I'm working with a seller, I have a signed listing agreement. It makes sense. It's logical.
Yeah.
It outlines our relationship. It outlines our services
Yeah.
and what I can expect from my client, and most importantly, what my client can expect from me.
Yeah.
Right. So it makes sense. Now, that wasn't mandated. Now it's mandated, and
But on that, with the services that you mentioned, does that change the timing of when this can happen? Because you may get a call from like a Zillow lead or from anywhere, a prospective buyer. They're gonna want you to show them a house.
yeah.
So
I mean,
how does that change with this buyer agreement
it
now,
does
timing
change.
wise?
It changes things. I mean, like, look, the fact is that you need to have an agreement signed before you open any doors, and that includes actual virtual showings. So I can't even go into a property on a buyer's behalf unless I have a signed agreement. Now, the leeway is there's different variations of this agreement, and to me, that kind of highlights the point that in the end, everything is negotiable.
Yeah.
I always say that in real estate. I always said that before this settlement change.
Yeah.
Everything is negotiable.
Yeah.
Whether that be commissions, whether that be the closing date, the escrow amount, the price, everything has always been negotiable. And I think that's important for the consumer to realize is that commissions have actually always been negotiable. And I mean, there have been times in the past where I would see a property when I'd be representing a buyer and they'd be offering 2%,
Yeah.
or they'd be offering 1, or they'd be offering none. Or you look and the listing agent is a flat fee service, or just where the seller pays someone to list it on the MLS. And these things have always existed. It's just there was no media push, and there was not a
It's more
lawsuit.
transparent now.
But what there was missing was a lack of transparency
Yeah.
and a lack of education, from our side to the consumer. So now I on the like overall, I think the change is positive.
Yeah.
And I think it's mainly due to more education and more of us being able to show our value.
Yeah.
Because in the end, like, are you going to sign an agreement with someone who you don't like, who doesn't have value? I mean, you're not going to sign away the sale or the purchase of what's potentially your biggest asset to an amateur.
Yeah.
Right? You're actually probably going to think about, hey, who am I going to work with? Why am I going to work with them? So now, as agents, our job is to really demonstrate and show our value up front, before we get into a further business transaction with someone.
Yeah, and I think that's interesting that you said that, because now that that virtual thing is new. I didn't know that.
Yeah, yeah.
You can't
Nope,
even
you can't
send a
I mean, you
link
can
or
send a video,
anything
but
like,
you can't go see a property on someone's behalf.
on someone's behalf. Yeah, that's news.
And real quick, the other big change, just to tie this together,
Yeah.
is that the cooperating broker, the listing side of a transaction can no longer advertise or offer a commission on the MLSs. That's it.
Right.
They can actually still offer a commission, but it cannot be on the MLS. Nowhere related to the MLS at all. Um, that's very strict, very important. No offer of commission on the MLS. That's the big thing. So, in that sense, we have to negotiate with each side. And the idea is that before, sellers would just negotiate with the listing agent for the commission for both sides. So if I was representing a buyer, I would generally just have to take whatever that listing agent negotiated with the seller.
Yeah, 3%
And
or
sometimes
2.5%,
it would
right.
be 3%. Sometimes it would be less. And you know, I consider myself a full service agent.
Yep.
And I deserve a full commission when I give my full service. Now, sometimes that listing agent might have negotiated for less, and I couldn't really do much about that. I mean, sure, I could have negotiated, and I actually have in the past, but there was a lot more power and responsibility in the listing agent's hands. And I mean, it worked well. The system worked well.
Yeah.
But if you really dig deep and think about how it works now, it's not a radical change, and it is beneficial to all parties.
Right.
More transparency, more negotiating power on both sides of the transaction, and going forward, I think it's going to be a overall good thing for the industry.
Yeah, I think everybody's all for just buyers before they make a decision is, know before you buy, right? So they want to dial in what agent, obviously they want to work with. And I'm sure that's a challenge, though, too, because as a buyer, asking them to sign something really kind of for them makes them feel as if they're kind of like locked in or at least working with you, whereas before they weren't necessarily having to do that before. So they could technically be working with you, with another agent here. So
They could.
Yeah.
And that has happened in the past. I mean, I've been in the industry for 11 years, so obviously that's happened to me in the past. But what I like about it is that you can really establish a relationship up front, and when someone puts pen to paper, it becomes a lot more real.
Yep.
To not just the agent, but more importantly, the buyer and what we now refer to as the consumer.
Right.
Because they realize, hey, now I have a responsibility to fill, and if I don't, I am legally liable.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you signed a commission agreement with someone, with an agent, you signed a full buyer's broker's rep for X amount of time, and then you bought with someone else, you are legally liable to pay that agent a commission. So you need, as a consumer, you have to really be sure.
Yeah.
And what I recommend is, and what I recommend to everyone, but my clients in general, I'm sorry, my clients specifically, is that we sit down and ideally we have a in-person meeting at my office, but Zoom works well too.
Yep.
And the main goal is just to find out whether it makes sense to work together, because it doesn't always make sense to work together. Whether maybe they're looking in Palm Beach, and I live in Brickell, right? So it's not like I won't go up there, but I probably won't go up there. And then I can refer them to another agent in the Compass network,
Sure.
who will be able to better provide them service. But in addition, sometimes maybe you don't vibe with someone, maybe you don't have the best rapport, and then I could refer them to someone else in my company, my team, whatever. But it's really important to be able to sit down with someone, get to know their needs, their wants, their timing, and find out if it's a good fit.
Yeah. I love what you just said, because sometimes, I mean, that happens, on our end, and especially for anybody who is kind of new to the game, right? The real estate game. They want to make every deal work. They want to make every buyer work. And to your point, there's times where you just don't vibe with somebody, and you can tell when that's happening. It's either, maybe a combative conversation, or it just isn't, again, to your point, like a fit. So that's why it's great to have, obviously a network that you can refer out. But, a lot of times people who are new try to make it work, and they probably not end up working with them because the buyer feels that way, though, too. Sorry, the
Exactly.
consumer. The consumer feels that way also, and would
You
rather
can use
work
both
with
words.
somebody that they're more comfortable with, right? That they could, obviously work and have more free flowing ideas and being able to reach and communicate effectively with them.
Exactly. I mean, you hit on it right there. And personally, I've seen that in the evolution of my career as well. I mean, when I first started in real estate, I was like 23, 24.
Yeah.
Like, and like I would have worked with anybody. I mean, I told you guys earlier, I sold a $40,000 house.
Yeah.
And there wasn't much commission in there. I'll tell you that much. Um, but as I've gotten older, if I don't and more experienced, and of course made more money, and I don't have that need to work with everyone. It's really important that I have a connection with someone so that we have a good working relationship. Because in the end, I feel like when you're working with someone to help them buy a property,
Yeah.
it's oftentimes becomes collaborative because the way that technology is today and the way that the information is out there, a lot of times like people they'll do a lot of like the searching on their own.
Yeah.
They'll maybe when you start talking to them, they've been looking on Zillow for 6 months. Um, so it's important to have that collaborative relationship and collaborative style, and then of course to be able to help them refine what they're looking for.
Yeah, and I think, always with what we're doing. I mean, obviously, we want to work with, with the consumer. Obviously, purchasing a property. This has happened a number of times where maybe you don't get the deal right then and there.
It happens.
But if you obviously do your best foot forward in terms of providing the best service that you can, providing a recommendation, educating them on the process, they might genuinely like you more than who they're currently working with. Maybe you have better rates
Yep.
or better commissions. But what I've found in my career is you don't get the deal then, but later down the line, you can get the deal later. So
It's very very
or they refer
possible.
your services to other people because they genuinely liked you, but they feel obliged or obviously go a different direction, but they refer your services, and I can't say enough like how many times that has happened.
Yeah.
So you just have to just obviously you know uh, uh, put your best foot forward.
Yeah, I mean, I can think of an example we had recently. I think it might have been a year ago, but just talking about how maybe it might not be the right time for the client, but it's better for the relationship to always be honest. And what happened in this case is we were working with someone. She had a sizable down payment, over 200K, wanted to buy a nice single family home for her family. But when we ran the numbers with the rising insurance costs and the rates at the time, which were much higher than they are now, the payments were like 11K
Yeah.
when you could rent a place for like 5, 6.
Right.
So it didn't make sense for her at the time,
Yeah.
right? And I ended up helping her get a new place to rent.
Yeah.
And like, yeah, I made a fraction of the money. I don't care. What matters to me is the long-term relationship, and I'm sure that one day it'll work out. But I honestly don't care if it does or not. I mean, my priority and our priority there was to just give the best advice and do right by the client and know that in the long term it'll pay off in spades. I mean, 10x.
Yeah. Absolutely.